Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Clive. I'm one of the addiction counselors at Changes, and welcome to our family support group. This evening, I'm going to talk about the role of grief and loss in addiction. And I'm going to go through how it affects the addict and the loved one as well. So this is a poem that I found, which is anonymous, that I want to just read to everyone. It's called Shattered. My life left me while I went right on breathing. I saw nothing around me while I went on seeing. I had no words while I went on talking. I showed no feelings while I suffered deep inside. It was the only way I thought I could survive. All my plans, all my hopes, all my time just stopped. Going through this, it just depicts both the loved ones and the families and the addict when they're actually in the grips of addiction. And it's scary. And grief is part of this and the loss as well. So I'm going to discuss a few things and take you through that. The definition of grief is intense sorrow, especially caused by someone's death. When you're grieving, you experience many different thoughts and feelings. As strange as these emotions may seem, they are a true expression of where you are right now. Rather than denying or being victimized by these feelings, we want to help the individual to learn how to recognize and learn from them. Naming their feelings and acknowledging them are the first steps to dealing with them. It's actually a process of becoming familiar with their feelings that will help them to heal. Also, please keep in mind, feelings are not good or bad, they just are. If you feel a feeling as you grieve, that simply means that you need to explore it and find healthy ways to express it. Feelings related to grief. Grief is a natural response to loss. It's an emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love is taken away. Often the pain of loss can feel overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult, unexpected emotions. Some of these emotions are sorrow, misery, profound sadness, anguish, distress, agony, torment, suffering, heartache, heartbreak, regret, shame, shock, anger, disbelief, numbness, resentment, and guilt. Grief and loss. Grief and loss can come in various situations. A death of a loved one, the realization that you have a disease, divorce or breakup, losing a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, a death of a pet, loss of a cherished dream, a loved one's diagnosis of a serious illness, a loss of a friendship, a loss of safety after trauma, moving to a new house, school, or city. An addiction is a loss. Whatever you lose is personal to you, so don't deny how you're feeling. The role of grief and loss in addiction. Addicts and family members in early stages of recovery may consider the strong role that grief and loss play in their experience. These are obvious times when we consider grief to be a natural reaction to life circumstances, like when someone dies. However, the experience of grief is not only stimulated by losing a loved one, it also presents itself if someone loses a way of living or a way of looking at themselves. In the process of recovering from an addiction, grief emerges in a reaction to the intense changes taking place in the addict and the family. As the addiction problem is being addressed, understanding and accepting this process of grieving helps recovery be less of a mystery. Before exploring the grief process itself, it might be helpful to identify some of the losses that may be brought forth from addiction. Firstly, the loss of addiction itself. No matter how much havoc or trauma the addict's drug, alcohol use, or addictive behaviors cause themselves and loved ones, or how grateful you may be that the using or acting out has stopped, the addict is going to miss their drugs. They're going to miss the distraction, relaxation, intensity, and the high the behavior or substance offered them. The addict is going to miss the easy way to escape difficult feelings and experiences, and will be overwhelmed at times by all they are now having to experience without the buffer. Rituals. Addicts come to miss the rituals surrounding their acting out behavior, places, patterns, and secret activity of their substance or behavior addictions were built into their lives, just as sordidly as a job or new home, and changing these is difficult and sometimes painful. Addictive relationships. Addicts often lose relationships that were maintained with people they involved in their acting out and using. For some, whole social groups and specific activities like happy hour or being online, social media, clubbing, having friends that were in active addiction, have to be given up in the name of avoiding returning to addiction. Living an addictive life involves avoiding accountability and responsibility to people and activities that might interfere with the freedom to use substances or act out with sex, gambling, etc. The life of a recovering person involves a great deal of being accountable, checking out decisions and actions with other people, as well as meeting all commitments and responsibilities. As with the addict, the partner, family members will experience losses as the transition and challenges of addiction and recovery take place. Despite the partner and family's desire to have the addict stop using or acting out, there remain painful challenges arising in this process of change, even as the person gains sobriety. Certain patterns of relating, this is the relationship role, certain patterns of relating become ingrained in the relationships, particularly in those relationships where addiction is present. A partner who has been in a caretaking role for an addicted person, and that is covering up their problems, soothing over problems, making up for the addict's shortcoming, parenting, financial, etc., will have difficulty transitioning in retaking the reins of their own lives and trusting the addicted person to now actually be more responsible. Not being needed can be a difficult challenge for loved ones of the addict. The loss of predictability. As difficult as being in a relationship with an addict can be, at least there was some emotional and situational predictability. Once the patterns of addiction are established, addicts in recovery actually can be more moody, vocal about their needs and wants, and assertive than someone living in the shame of their addiction. These can be difficult changes for a loved one to understand and tolerate. Unhappiness. This is an interesting one as well. Strange enough, a lonely partner consistently abandoned, rejected, or let down in their relationship with an active addict can become comfortable in their misery. Having an identifiable person and situation to blame for one's unhappiness keeps the burden of self-examination and self-understanding away. A partner now in a relationship with a functional, responsible, and connected recovering person has to look more closely at themselves when feeling unhappy, disappointed, or unfulfilled. Time taken by the recovery process as well. As the recovery process gets more involved, as the recovering person, gets more involved in the 12-step program and therapy, self-care, they may not be any more available for relating and spending time than they were in the days of active addiction. Once kept apart by substance use, and acting out, couples may now find themselves separated by support groups, sponsors, time spent in recovery processes. This can be a real disappointment to the partners expecting a lot of time to be closely spent together following the addict's return to the same living. The stages of grieving. The process of grief follows a fairly understandable pattern. This was first made clear in the 1970s landmark book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross called On Death and Dying. In her book, Dr. Ross was able to identify and differentiate the stages a person goes through when grieving a loss. We understand that not everyone goes through each and every stage, nor do these stages follow a predictable pattern. Nevertheless, the feelings and situations that people go through in recovery process can be aligned with these concepts. These stages exist primarily to shield the person who is grieving from being overwhelmed by their feelings and experiences. Grief is a process that takes time, support, self-acceptance to move beyond. The stages of grief. And this is by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And this model describes 5 primary responses to grief. And what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross often says is grief must be witnessed to be healed. And I think this is important. So the first stage is the stage of denial. Okay, and this is where the stage is, this isn't happening, is a well-known aspect of addiction. Oftentimes, both the family and the individual will conceive themselves that there is no problem, convince themselves that there's no problem with alcohol or drugs, or at least the problem is not a significant one and certainly not out of control. Frequently, those around the addict will move past the denial stage prior to the addictive individual. And this is often what we work with the addict in primary, is often working in breaking the denial, letting them see how their denial has been a big part of their stumbling block. Denial, 5 steps. The denial in 5 easy steps. Number 1, you see the evidence. 2, you ignore your intuition. 3, you swallow your emotions. 4, you reason away the evidence. And 5, you pretend all is well. The second stage is the anger stage. Why is this happening to me? Both for the addict and for the family. Anger enters when the addict realizes that he or she has a problem. The anger may manifest because the addict is upset that they can no longer use drugs, or it may be a fear, a mask as anger, because they want to stop using but find they are unable to. Anger for the addict can be self-directed. It can also be directed to the loved ones and even at the world at large, as a result of the addict's increasing inability to deny that the problem exists. We often look at the outbursts of anger, which are often the external that you can see. But deep down, there's a lot of internal anger. There's fear, embarrassment, despair, unsure, tricked, stressed, rejected, anxious, insecure, guilt, shame, and feelings of helplessness. And as we said, there are two types. They might even direct the anger towards other people and a higher power, life in general, or even blame. To be angry with a loved one is very common at this point. Stage 3, and stage 3 is the bargaining stage. I will do anything to change this. Bargaining often enters the picture when the addict is trying to please someone else or perhaps get out of trouble. The addict may promise loved ones that they may stop using in hopes of gaining some type of needed support, money, or a place to live. The addict may bargain to get out of trouble, such as agreeing to attend treatment to lessen legal consequences. The addict may be fully cognizant that there is a significant problem, but may not be ready or willing to make changes to resolve the problem directly. Bargaining may also take the form of convincing oneself that it's possible to use drugs or alcohol moderately, an attempt to see addictive behaviors as harmless or sustainable when they're not. Often, this is when the loved ones tend to weaken when the addict tries to bargain with them. And this is important for you guys to stand your ground, is stick to what you came to. And they also want to strike deals with the family and their higher power at this stage. The fourth stage.
Sorry, Clive, if maybe I can just add some few
Sure.
stuff there. On the third stage, bargaining. And I'm glad that you mentioned standing their ground. So this is more of, sticking to the boundaries that the families might have developed once someone is in treatment, because it's more of, this person will say, I'll do treatment as long as you do this particular thing for me. And because of the desperation that comes with, helping your loved one, it's easy to give in to say, okay, you can do treatment, and then this will be the reward.
And that's important, Chris, because often on the telephone, I'm doing so well, I'm learning so much, I've got it, I understand it, and they want to convince their loved ones that they're okay and they need to come home. And this is a really tricky part, because we always say at this stage is don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens. They didn't become addicted in one day, so they need to take time to change. And I think that's where I agree with you, Chris. This is so important.
Yes, thanks, Clive.
So the next stage is the stage 4, which is what we call the depression. And this sets in when the addict comes to terms with the fact that they must now live a life without drugs. There is depression, which is common in the withdrawal stages, when the brain research now provides evidence that in withdrawal stages and for a period of time afterwards, there are physical reasons for depression and numbness. Many newly sober people will experience this, and it is often exacerbated by the addict's reflection on and the feelings of guilt, shame, remorse over all the damage done by this substance abuse. And they will feel this and they go into the depression. And this stage can last for a while. The acceptance stage is it's going to be okay. I know what happened and it can't be changed. Okay. And this is a hard stage. The acceptance stage is not necessarily when the addict admits to the problem. The admission of the problem can often happen much earlier, long before they take assertive action to address the problem. Acceptance is the time when the addict admits there is a problem and takes action to change the situation. This stage for an addict is focused on resolution of the problem and is very much an action stage in the process, in contrast to the common perception that acceptance stage for a terminally ill one is a passive acceptance. You know, before we close, and I think there's a lot that we can talk about over here, Chris, and a lot that I'd like the families to share on, in that in these stages and the grief process, people can vacillate and go backwards and forwards. They can go from denial into anger, back into denial. They can go from denial to bargaining, you know, from bargaining to the depression. But when an addict gets to the acceptance stage, and when an addict goes through these stages more than once, and after a relapse, for example, some addicts never come to the resolution point of acceptance. Many die as a result of their addiction. But these stages offer a useful model in identifying the trajectory of addiction and assisting the addict and loved ones in understanding the process. Chris, you know, I think at this stage, what we want to do is really hear from people how they perceive it, what questions they have about this, and maybe even if you want to come in and say something as well.
Yes, thanks, Bev. Yeah, I think, I mean, it is very important, as you mentioned, that to be able for the loved ones to be able to identify maybe what stage could their loved one be at. Because let's say, for instance, someone is showing this angry behavior, and at that moment you are not so able what you need to, you're not so aware what you could be the problem or how you could help, you know. It's quite a difficult position to be if you can't be able to identify what stage is that person at. So I think this is quite helpful for the family members.
Yeah, and it's also important that the family members are going to be going through the exact same stages at some point, you know, because addicts and families get addicted to the chaos, you
I
know,
agree.
and it's a very difficult thing because then, you know, the loved one also needs to identify where are they in this process. You know, and it's often even in the acceptance stage, you know, the share that we had last week is, am I able to step out and see that I need to look after myself and I can't save the addict? You know, and that share by Lee last week was really important to see that, like, you can hook in and you are sick as the addict if you allow yourself to stay there.
No, I mean, I agree with you, Clive. As I mean, we always say that addiction is a family disease, you know. Uh, and the reality is, if you are not willing to see the truth for what it is, to say, if you are still in the same cycle, it's going to be difficult for you to be healthy as well, because I mean it's difficult to save someone who's not willing. But if you can't even see that you are part of the cycle as well, it's quite concerning, you know. You need to be able to say, okay, these are my boundaries. As much as it could be difficult, you know, to put on to stand your ground, it might be difficult, but at some point it has to be done, because somehow someone has to come out from that cycle to be able to take measures, you know.
And I agree with you. And this is where we try to teach the addicts to take responsibility, as well as we want the loved ones to take responsibility for themselves, you know. And this is a tough process, you know, because um, it's a people get stuck. And, you know, I think that the big thing that we always do, even with addicts, is we wanting them to get to understand what they're feeling. Because for so many years they've numbed their feelings, that we're now trying to awaken feelings. And also, loved ones also going to the stage of they feeling, they are actually feel what they relate to the addict. So if the addict is reactive, they sad, they trying to fix. So even their feelings are distorted. You know, we're going to the blame game. You know, if that person would change, we don't want to own how we feel. And addicts have a hard time actually connecting with feelings. And feelings are okay, whatever they are. And that's what I try to emphasize right in the beginning, is that if we can work with the feelings, we've got something to work
Mm. No, no, I agree with you, Clive. I mean, the other important thing to realize with regard to feelings is in active addiction, there's no growth with regard to emotions and feelings, and I think that's why uh, addiction is regarded as the disease of you know, the spiritual. It gets to affect us mentally, spiritually, and physically, obviously. So if there's no growth in active addiction with regard to emotions, clearly uh, uh, the addict wouldn't just switch, you know, within few days to say, I'm acknowledging these feelings, and which is okay to have, you know, as you emphasized earlier, that there are no good or bad feelings. It's
correct.
about acknowledging what you are feeling, and I think that is very important for the family members as well, to realize that, you know, uh, um, it's going to be difficult if you are also not allowing yourself to feel these emotions as they come. Because I mean, Clive, it could be difficult to get to see your loved one committing suicide by continuation of denying that they're actually struggling with the substance, you know.
Of course. And you're so right there. And the thing is that loved ones will deny what they're feeling as
Mhm.
well, because they just want to focus on, you know, saving their loved one,
Mm.
you know. And sometimes, as we can see from last week, you've got to sometimes be cruel. You've got to put in a bottom line, because
Mm.
kindness kills. Sometimes we
Mm.
have to be cruel to be kind, to set those bottom lines. But I think
Mm.
I'd love to hear from the support group people on. If you've got any questions, or if you want to put up your hands and share, this is the time. This is important for you, because often the questions you have, people have as well. Do you agree?
Yes, yes. You can raise your hands, and then you can be given the opportunity to share, ask any questions.
You know, it's so difficult, hey, Chris, because a lot of shame for both the family and the addict
Mm.
sit with this illness.
Mm. Mm. And I think, you know, that is the also the biggest thing, for progress, when someone, even after realization, to say, okay, I do have this problem. Because
Mhm.
to accept on its own, it doesn't necessarily mean that you still don't have to be honest about other stuff, you know. It could
Of
be
course.
in a healthy relationship, for instance. You need to sit and get to realize that, okay, uh, I also contributed towards that. That could be shameful. And
Mhm.
if it's not exposed or get to be shared with people, you know, it can get to keep you sick, because you'll be holding on to that to say, I prolonged this by not admitting, or you know, it's quite shameful for what has
Mhm.
been happening. So it can also get to delay the progress of an addict, themselves, you know.
And it's hard because, you know, we often say, and this is important, and Chris will, you know, back me up on this. We often say, you know, people say, well, if I do it geographical, if I go to some other place, that will be better, you know. And we say to the addict, and this is what we say, wherever you go, you take yourself with you, and you're the
Mm,
problem.
and I think, that is what it is, because, you know, as much as we get to perceive the substance as the main problem, but in reality, is the main problem is the person. Because using or drinking is just a symptom. Because uh, most of the stuff that people get to want from the substances, or what substances do for them, it's actually an inside job, you know. It is not something that you can get from the outside. And hence, when you just change location, or whatever, it's still the same thing. And it's the same even when maybe someone is using, someone mentioned a hard drug and weed, you know. Someone can be using drugs and then uh, think that, okay, maybe if I can take a drink, this time is going to be different. But the reality is that this of addiction is just a disease, you know. It doesn't matter what you are taking.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter. You know, people also say, like we often talk to them that say, you know, it was the crystal meth that's the problem. And we say, is the crystal meth sitting here in treatment? You here. Because it's not the alcohol, it's not the crystal meth. You are the problem. What we're saying is, as much as your partner is going through a process, so do you. And if you are part of Naranon, Coda, or one of the fellowships, you do meetings as well. Sometimes certain meetings run where there's a family support group and there's an NA meeting at the same time. You know, that's how, if you look at Bill W., his wife, people were sitting in their cars waiting for the alcoholic to come out. And she started the support group by calling them in and having tea with them.
Okay.
So, you know, there is balance. In the beginning, it's what we say is the primary thing is to work your recovery. Okay. And it's to work it with communication with your partner
Okay.
as well. Chris, have
Yes.
you got anything to add there?
Yes, yes, Clive, thanks. And I think, as you mentioned, Clive, that, you know, you also have to go through your own process.
Mm-hmm.
And now this means that, you know, in active addiction, you might find that it was difficult for you to be honest about certain stuff, or to be brutally honest to your problem, to say, hey, look, I don't appreciate one, two, and three, which maybe in this moment we can say these are boundaries. So that is also something that you need to implement in order to uh, get the relationship to be unhealthy, because you might find that there were enabling behaviors in the past, and if these are not ironed or put on the table, it
Mm-hmm.
it it, it is just it can just keep on adding to what has been going on. So
Mm-hmm.
so 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 remember, even in active addiction, the unhealthy relationship was being maintained, you know.
Mhm.
So the healthy relationship needs maintenance as well, right?
Yes.
So the
And
maintenance, yes, the receipt will be the honesty, you know, communication, as Clive said. So these smallest things, you know, they get to contribute and keep the relationship healthy.
Mhm. And it's
Okay.
key, it's communication. It's like, you know, like, I'm missing you. I'd like some time with you.
Mhm.
You know, let's create the time. You know, even it's like it's a whole new relationship. Yeah, and this is for everyone. It's like dating all over again.
Clive, you have been so helpful to us to make us positive again. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Abstinence is fine. A whole life is so wondrous. That is overwhelmingly a better option.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mel. And then there's one from Sheila Smith again. I was wondering about Mel comment. If I'd done something sooner then, what sort of percentage of addicts relapse if they were forced to go to rehab versus those who choose to get treatment? So I'm not sure if for this one we can be able to pinpoint at a particular percentage. You know, it's difficult to say because at the end of the day, it is all it all comes down from both parties. You know, as a family member or as a loved one, you also need to stand your ground, as we mentioned earlier. And obviously, if the addict is also willing to go to treatment themselves, that should be positive as well, eh?
Yeah.
Uh,
But I think that, you know, that's a really interesting question that Sheila. We often say, bring the rock bottom up. You
mm,
know, that can come in what we call pre-contemplative and then start to realize their problem as well. So the
mm,
sooner you see it, the sooner you realize there's a problem for the loved one, take action.